to start us off, I'm going to give you a quiz, and you're going to consider all of the yeses that you have to these questions. So first question, I put the needs and wants of others before my own. Number 2, I agree with others to avoid conflict. Number 3, I find myself unable to say no to things. Number 4, I'm afraid to say no out of fear or guilt. Number 5, I allow others to speak for me. Next one, I find myself accepting poor treatment from others. Just keep track of how many yeses. I find myself taking on more and more despite potential for burnout. I often try to fix others and their problems. This doesn't count if you're a therapist. I attempt to control others. And the last one, I don't trust myself or others. How many of you answered yes to at least one of those? How many of you answered yes to a lot more than you thought you would? Okay, what is a boundary? These are some of the things that my clients tell me when I ask this question. It could be a border, it could be a limit, a confine, a demarcation. My favorite word to describe a boundary is an expectation. How do you feel when people let you know what to expect from them? Isn't that kind of nice? Like when you go to a job, what does your job give you when you first start working there? A job description, right? And what does that job description tell you? It says, these are the things you're responsible for, and if you do those things, we will give you a paycheck, right? Or we'll give you other, things like health care and that sort of thing, if you do these things. That's really nice to know. How do you feel when you get to a job and there's no job description and they're constantly asking you to do things and you didn't realize that was something you were going to have to do, or you have to take over for somebody else all the time, or that sort of thing? Isn't that frustrating? How about when you're driving? Do you know that we have boundaries all over the place? When you go outside here, what is a boundary that we all have when we're driving? Speed limits, but we also have lines in the road. Isn't that nice? For my husband and I, this is the first time we've driven on the wrong side of the road, on the wrong side of the car. And it was really helpful to see all of your signs. Apparently, we're not the only people not from Australia, because we saw, I don't know how many signs, honey, did we see that please stick to the left side of the road. In Australia, we drive on the left side of the road. We saw those over and over and over again, probably in the areas where the tourists often go. But we saw them over and over again. We appreciated them. After a point, we're like, okay, we get it. You can stop telling us. But it was nice to be reminded every so often so we weren't on the wrong side of the road. But I really like this because do you know we have expectations all day, every day? And by the way, if you don't think you like boundaries, I can prove that you do. And one of the things that I saw when I was working in the group home is a lot of kids, I told you that I worked with at-risk kids, all had committed crimes, and they would tell me over and over again, I hate rules, I hate rules, I hate rules, I don't want anything to do with rules, I hate rules, I just want to be free. But do you know what happened? Every time I went on holiday, I would tell the kids, hey, I'm not going to be here, so you're not going to have to do therapy for a whole week or 2 weeks or whatever. And you know when I got, actually they would celebrate. They'd be like, this is awesome, I don't have to go to therapy, because they were all mandated to do it. And then I would come back, and do you know what they would all say? Where were you on Tuesday at 3 o'clock? Because that was maybe their therapy session. And what had they been telling me up until my holiday? I don't want to see you. Why do I have to come and see you? But then when I get back, what do they say? Where were you? As though I had let them down. even though I was constantly the one trying to get them to come to their therapy session. So I don't believe it when kids say, I don't like boundaries. Because boundaries actually create healthy, happy homes. But they also create healthy, happy workplaces. They create all kinds of healthy, happy places. And do you know, anybody in here married? Yeah. Okay. Do you know that you had boundaries in your wedding ceremony? In your vows? Did anybody say their vows at their wedding? Do you know what that interaction was? A list of expectations. If you did the traditional vows, what were you promising? What you can expect from me. What are the boundaries? Did anybody say anything along the lines of, I'll love only you till death do us part? Isn't that a boundary? I can expect that you're not going to go find somebody else. I'm not saying people don't break the boundaries, but even our vows are a list of boundaries and expectations that we're sharing with another person and letting them know what they can expect, and also it's nice to know what we can expect. So boundaries are very important, and they're necessary in healthy relationships. So one of the things that we talked about, or that's within each one of these presentations, is emotional intelligence. What is emotional intelligence? Well, first I want to give you a little bit of background. Anybody in here, you don't have to raise your hand, but worried that you're not like the smartest person, like you weren't the smartest person in school or you didn't get the best grades. Did you know that there is more than one type of intelligence? A man by the name of Howard Gardner, he's a psychologist, he came up with the 8 different types of intelligences. And he wanted people to recognize that there isn't only one type of intelligence. And so if you look on the far left, you can see linguistic. Some people are very good at finding the right words to express what they mean. Maybe you have this ability. Some people are spatially intelligent. They are good at visualizing the world in 3D. Some people may not realize that they're spatially intelligent, but some of you, have you ever been given the opportunity to pack the, do you call it the boot in your car? I've been paying attention all week that I've been here. Actually, it's a British term too, so I know. But how many of you, if you have to pack the boot of your car and somebody gives you a ton of stuff, you're really good at fitting all of it in? You're spatially intelligent. That's a cool thing. You can brag about that kind of intelligence if you want to. Some of us are naturalistic or naturalists. We understand living things and reading nature. I have a friend, her daughter is really good with animals. She's so good. She's like a little Snow White. Do you ever watch Snow White? She can actually go out. They live in the country. She can go out and she'll bring birds back in her hand to show her parents. And they're like, how do you do this? And she makes friends with all the animals. I didn't know that was a thing. I thought that was a fairy tale, but she does this. She's really good with animals. But do you know people who are really good at with plants? My grandfather used to be very good with plants. He could grow anything from the littlest clipping of something and turn it into a beautiful garden. Some people are that way. Musical, anybody play instruments or sing in here? Or have an ear for the right, somebody can hum a note and you know exactly which one it is? I see one back there that people are pointing to. How about bodily and kinesthetic? Anybody athletic in here? You don't have to be a professional athlete to have bodily and kinesthetic intelligence. But some people are really good and they can play just about any sport. They can maybe dance or do all kinds of body kinds of things like Pilates. I saw that you guys have a class for that. All kinds of things, and they're just really good at that. That's another form. And then, of course, there's the logical, mathematical one. That's the academic one that we often think of. But I want to point to the 2 bottom ones here. These 2 bottom ones. These have to do with intrapersonal and interpersonal intelligence. Some people are really good at recognizing the things going on with themselves and they can express that to their doctor, their dentist, whoever else, maybe even understand like why they're feeling sick. I know for me, I don't often get sick because I'm around sick people. I get sick because I've taken on too much. That's one thing that I know about myself. I don't get sick from being around sick people. I get sick when I've taken on too much. So I know I have to slow down. But then we also have interpersonal intelligence. Are you good at picking up on other people's maybe moods, or that they're not feeling right at the time, or you're good at reading body language? You know, that doesn't mean you decide everything for them because of that, but you have a certain intelligence with that. Both of these things have to do with emotional intelligence, because if you look at these two types of intelligences, the qualifiers for emotional intelligence is actually, one, recognizing my emotions and managing my emotions. That has to do with intrapersonal intelligence. And then the next two, recognizing other people's emotions and managing my relationships with others, that has to do with interpersonal intelligence. And then all of those together have to do with making and sticking with my goals. That means I don't let my emotions get in the way of finishing goals, and I don't let my relationships get in the way of finishing my goals too. So these 5 things, these 5 qualities are about emotional intelligence. The first 2 have to do with intrapersonal boundaries. How many of you have really good self-control? There's a reason we're talking. My husband's waving his hand. Not with sugar. Sorry, honey. But we have to have good intrapersonal boundaries, but we also have to have healthy interpersonal boundaries. And these 2 things are part of emotional intelligence. By the way, what is emotional intelligence? Have you ever met somebody at work who has a great resume, but they're really difficult to work with? One minute they're one way, the next minute they're another way. They don't show up if they don't feel like it. They don't do their work if they don't feel like it. They're always calling out, or they're having difficulties interacting with customers or other employees. Those people do not have high emotional intelligence. That's what we're talking about here, emotional intelligence. But I want to spend a little bit more time talking about intrapersonal intelligence, or intrapersonal boundaries. We're moving on to boundaries now. That represents self-control. But I want you to consider how many of these different categories you have practiced self-control in, or good boundaries with. Can anybody think of an area in their life where they practice boundaries with themselves physically? What would be an example of practicing boundaries with yourself physically? Yes, that's a perfect one. That shows you have a great boundary. You wake up at 4 a.m. By the way, congratulations. That's right. Huh? 4. I wanted to be able to relate to you a little bit better. Didn't give me a chance. But yes, that's a great example of a physical boundary. Even if I don't feel like it, I get up at 4:30 to practice a physical boundary. I want to whip my body into shape, and the only way I have time for it might be if I wake up at 4:30. How about mental boundary? Have you ever thought of a mental boundary that you might have? Anybody have a mental boundary that they practice? Can you think of what that might be? And intrapersonally, meaning just for yourself, not just with other people, but with yourself. Huh? Oh, yeah, that's a great one. Focusing. Do I let myself get distracted by everything, or do I stay focused on something? I know a lot of us probably have difficulties with this. Have you ever tried to clean a room, and then one thing you wind up in another room, and you're like, wait, what was I doing again? But to stay focused, I'm not going anywhere else until I finish this. I'm mental focus. Yeah, that's a great example. I love that. How about emotional? Does anybody have, can you think of an example of an emotional boundary that you might have for yourself? I have an example of one. So I had a roommate that loved to watch crime shows. Loved to watch crime shows. And so, because I lived with her, I started getting caught up in watching them with her because we didn't have a very big place. It was a small apartment. And so I'd start watching them with her. And then one day I walked out of my apartment to go across to the gym. There was just a little parking area, and then the gym was on the other side. And I would take my keys with me because I'd lock the door and go over there, and you had to use your key to open up the door of the gym. And I started noticing on my way from my apartment to the gym, I'd stick my keys between my fingers. And I'm walking with my keys between my fingers because I had developed a weapon just in case I needed some protection. And then it dawned on me, Amanda, the only reason you're doing this is because you're watching these crime shows and it's starting to mess with your emotions and you're starting to think that everything is scary. So you know what I did? I stopped watching the crime shows. And I didn't feel so scared about everything. And so I developed an emotional boundary for myself. And now a lot of people say, oh, it doesn't affect me. Do you know what my answer to that is? Why do you watch it then if it doesn't affect you? We watch those things because it does affect us. It gets our adrenaline pumping and it feels good and exciting. That's why we watch it. But it also makes us more fearful of things at the same time. How about a spiritual boundary? Does anybody have a spiritual boundary that they practice? Do you want to share? But yeah, getting up at 4:30 to read your Bible, that would be a spiritual boundary for yourself. That's a great example. How about a time boundary? I've heard some time boundaries too, because I think those have overlap with time boundaries. But any time boundary that you can think of that you practice? Yeah. Oh. Yes, going to bed at 9 o'clock. Otherwise, you can't wake up at 4:30, can you? Absolutely, that's a good one. How about a verbal boundary? Does anybody have any verbal boundaries?
Not using swear words.
Okay, yeah, there's a good boundary, good verbal boundary. How about financial? Anybody have any financial boundary that they practice for themselves? Do you try to stay within your budget? Hopefully there's some people in here that do that. That's a financial boundary. All of these things. Can I teach you a song I wrote? It's a very short song, and you'll recognize the tune. It goes to the tune of If You're Happy and You Know It. I wrote this during COVID when I had a lot of time. It goes, when you want what you want, but let it go. When you rush to speak, but take it slow. When your feelings say yes, but you tell them no. Self-control, that's self-control. Do you guys want to sing it with me? Okay, everybody, I want to hear a choir with me, okay? When you want what you want, but let it go. When you rush to speak, but take it slow. When your feelings say yes, but you tell them no. Self-control, that's self-control. There you go. Now you can sing this song when you're waiting for the checkout at the grocery store and the people are very slow in front of you. You just sing it in your head to yourself. If you want to take a picture, I'm about to turn. But I'm happy for the whole world to be singing one of the songs I wrote. Okay, so now that we did intrapersonal, we're going to talk about interpersonal boundaries. And one of the things that I mentioned before that you remember is when I teach people boundaries interpersonally, I want them to recognize that a lot of the reasons we have trouble interpersonally with boundaries is because of what we're telling ourselves in our head about boundaries. You know, in order to have healthy boundaries with people, you have to have the right thinking about boundaries. And there's 10 different lies that I have found that keep us from having healthy boundaries with other people. So I want to take you through these. We'll try to do it briefly because I know we don't have a ton of time. But the first one is what I call codependency. And this is when we believe I'm a nobody without a somebody in my life. Or I'm a nobody without somebody around. And this can be, I don't want you to get too caught up in the romantic, lovey-dovey picture, but sometimes this isn't just romantic. Sometimes it's, we don't have a sense of identity in ourselves. And so what do? We find our identity in the people we're around. This can be friendships, it can be family members, it can be a certain group at school, whatever the case may be. Sometimes we don't have healthy boundaries with other people because we think we're only as good as the people we're around, and whatever they want to do, we're going to do too. Now, there's a remedy for this. A lot of people will tell me, but I don't even know who I am. Here's one of the things that you can do to start having healthy boundaries. Do a values assessment. This has to do with intrapersonal awareness, but it also will affect your interpersonal relationships. And so start to consider, what are the things that you value? Now, if you look at this list, there's a lot of things here: health, money, family, job, so on and so forth. But let's take the first one. Most people would acknowledge that they believe that being healthy is important. Anybody here don't think that health is important? You just think that's a waste of time, there's no such thing as health, it doesn't matter? No, most people here believe in health. Do you know what the difference is between all of us? What we define health to be, right? Some people, their version of health is exercising every single day, going to the gym, running, that sort of thing. To them, that's the epitome of good health. Other people believe in mental health, and they read books, self-help books, they go to seminars, all of that, anything to do with mental health. Other people might, do things like supplements. Maybe they have 25 different supplements and they like to take all of them for all these different things. What happens when the person who wants to spend their money on supplements is friends with somebody who wants to spend their money on books and seminars? Who wins when they decide where they want to go? This is why it's important. You'll never have healthy boundaries in your relationships if you don't know what's important to you. That doesn't mean you never go to something that somebody else likes. It means, though, in terms of all of the things that are important to me, when do I say no and when do I say yes based on the things that are important to me? But you will never say no if you don't know what's truly important to you. And that means things like health, money, family, job, time, politics, and so on and so forth. So one of my challenges to you is to spend some time in the next several days just contemplating, what if nobody else existed and you didn't have to make your decision based on all the people around you, what would be important to you in terms of these different things? And then once you know what's important to you, it'll be easier to have boundaries around those things. And you'll start practicing those boundaries more readily because you know it's important to you. A lot of people just go with the flow and then they don't know who they are. The next lie that we often tell ourselves that keep us from having healthy boundaries is this lie that this is the best that I can do. And this is what I call the settler. The person that settles for this and settles for that, and they don't really care because partly they believe that they don't deserve anything better. It's this idea that we don't deserve anything better. So what can we do with this one? Well, let's look at that cognitive behavioral therapy triangle. If I believe this is the best that I can do, my behaviors are probably going to be not to have any boundaries. I don't try to be better, because why would I try to be better if I think this is the best that I can do? I become maybe clingy with people because I'm afraid that they'll leave me. Maybe I beat myself up, not physically necessarily, but in my own mind because I believe this is the best that I can do. And then I start to feel anxious, depressed, apathetic, and even angry that this is the best that I can do. So here's a question that you can ask yourself when this happens, or here's a way that you can reframe this. If God desires the best for me, I need to set my standards higher even in my relationships. This is something I can tell myself. Or another question or another thing that you could ask yourself too is, if I believed I could do better in my life, what would I do next? If I believed I could do better, what would I do next? Maybe I'd go apply for that job that I've been dreaming of. Maybe I would get out there and go join a club or something and meet other people. But I won't do that if I believe this is the best that I can do. Number 3, this is what I call the guilty party. This belief that I believe I'm responsible for everything. Do you know who often believes this one? Mothers. Why? Because, say for instance, you have a child. Dads could have this too. But say you have a child, and your child comes home, and it's let's just say it's Thursday night, and they have a project due on Friday. But you've already taken them to all these extracurricular activities. They've been playing soccer or whatever the case, football, what do you call that, rugby, all these different sports. And now it's 7 o'clock at night, and your kid is telling you they need a bunch of resources in order to do their project to turn it in tomorrow morning. And then you get this overwhelming feeling, well, maybe I'm not a good mom if I don't do this. And so what do? You run out and compensate for what your child didn't do. By the way, if your child is really young, what is the age when your grades start mattering? Like to get into uni, or you're 10, right? Your kid is in 3rd grade. But you think you're a horrible parent if you don't go and get all these things. Or maybe you have the resources, but you think, well, I don't want my kid to get a bad grade. So what do? You stay up all night doing their project for them. Does that sound like a good boundary or a bad boundary? But you might be doing it because you feel guilty. You don't want to be a bad parent, because if your kid gets a bad grade, sometimes we believe what they do is a poor reflection of our parenting. And so we start compensating over and over and over again. One of my favorite things to do is suggest that I am responsible for this and you are responsible for that. So how does this look when we're dealing with adults? Sometimes people don't want to take responsibility for something that they've done wrong, and so they like to do what we call projecting. Have any of you heard the term projection? It doesn't mean this kind of projector. But by the way, what is this projector doing? It's doing 2 things. It's taking a picture from either the computer, sometimes it can be a phone, and it's taking that picture and it does this, it blows it up, and then it projects it over onto something else. Do you know some people do that in order not to have to feel their own guilt? They take maybe their selfishness, they take maybe their anger, and what do? They blow it up and put it over onto somebody else. And as soon as you identify with that, we call it projective identification, as soon as you take responsibility for what they've done, and you go, well, maybe I am selfish. Maybe I am the angry one because I am getting upset. What are you now doing? It's projective identification. But here's the kicker. Do you know as soon as you take responsibility, I know why you do that. Because maybe that other person doesn't want to change. But if you take the responsibility of that, then you're actually taking away the potential for them to change. But we do this sometimes because we recognize I'm the only person that's going to take responsibility for it, so I might as well do it to pacify the relationship. But if I let this person take responsibility for what they've done, then they can start to change in the future maybe. But here's what often happens, is we stop taking responsibility for our own stuff and we start taking responsibility for somebody else's stuff. That's crazy making. How confusing is that? If I don't want to be responsible for my stuff, but then I want to be responsible for somebody else's stuff. Why don't we just focus on, I'm responsible for my stuff and you're responsible for your stuff? You're not doing anybody any favors by taking on their guilt. Okay? Is that clear? I hope so, because we're going to move on. The next one is what I call the romancer. A lot of times people have poor boundaries because they believe that my feelings mean everything. Not just to me, but my feelings mean everything. We call these, it's actually one of your cognitive distortions from the previous session. It's called emotional reasoning. So how does this work? Sometimes people, maybe we're having poor boundaries because we believe that our feelings must be true. So for instance, if I see somebody suffering and I don't like to see them suffer, so I think, well, I have to fix it for them. My feelings are telling me, hurry up and do something about this. This is really uncomfortable. Fix it for them. But what if while I'm fixing it for them, I'm actually making it easier for them to stay in the patterns that they're in? Sometimes people, I've seen this happen where kids will say, I need help, I need help. And then the parent goes, okay, I'll help you, but they're actually enabling them to continue bad behavior. And they don't realize just because you feel emotional about somebody suffering doesn't mean you need to jump in and rescue them. But a lot of people do this. And in America, I don't know about you guys, but we've had a few news stories in the last several years where people have broken out of prison. Do you have any of that happening here? Okay. People have broken out of prison. By the way, do you know how much technology is involved in prisons? Do you know how hard it is to break out of a prison? There's only really one way to do it. And every time you hear somebody break out of prison, you know how it happened. It's typically, I hate to generalize, but it is more so this way. It's typically a female guard and a male prisoner. Do you guys know where I'm going with this? And what does she think? Oh, he's different. He loves me. We're going to live happily ever after. And all of the stories I hear in America of this happening end up in one very fatal way. If the female guard makes it out at all, a lot of them have died in the process, but if they make it out at all, do you think they have a life after that? I mean, how far can you run before you're going to get caught? You just help somebody get out of prison, right? You're not going to get a job after that. Your life is ruined. But what does she say? I thought he was different. And I've seen a lot of people lose their jobs because they've been in work environments where there are certain rules, certain boundaries in that job, but they tell themselves, well, this is different. This person is different. By the way, in the group home, I watched a lot of fellow employees lose their jobs. Lots of employees lose their jobs because they wanted to be friends with the kids, and so they would bypass certain rules and boundaries in order to build a relationship because they thought, oh, this kid's different. And the kid was just taking advantage of them. They knew how to work them. In other words, manipulate or con. And sometimes, unfortunately, we want to be so nice that we're actually mean. We're mean to ourselves and we're mean to the other person because we're not looking out for their best interest. And whether you want to believe it or not, if you don't have that ability to know the difference between your feelings telling you something versus what the rules are, if you have a hard time with this, there's one thing that you can do. I want you to consider the person that you know that you look up to the most. Somebody, this could be a mentor, it could be somebody that you deeply, deeply respect. And I want you to consider, what would they say if I was about to tell them what I was going to do? What does that do? It checks you. It helps you realize this person would never be okay with what I'm about to do. They would tell me I'm crazy. Don't do that. Don't do that. And that's a good way to keep yourself from doing something just because you're emotional reasoning. Don't do that, okay? And so you can ask, and some people even ask, would God think this is a good idea? Number 5 is the rescuer. Sometimes we feel sorry for people. You know, we want to help them out. We want to do the nice thing. You know, there's a term called learned helplessness. Have you ever heard this term? Learned helplessness? I saw a video many, many years ago of a mother who found out when her son was being born that he was going to lose his ability to see. So quickly, he had a degenerative eye disorder, so quickly that he would not even be able to remember seeing. That's how quickly this degenerative eye disorder would take on. And it was so bad that his eyeballs were actually removed. Well, here's the thing. So this story wasn't about when he was a baby. It wasn't about when he was a toddler. He was about a teenager when this story was taking place, or when this video was taking place. And the person who was interviewing realized, hey, this is a different sort of person. I think this person knew before he went there. That's why he went there. But do you know what this kid was able to do as a teenager? He was actually able to use echolocation to figure out where he was at all times. So he would do this. He would click. And his hearing took over where his seeing was deficient, and he could hear the echo off of the side of buildings. Do you know this kid was able to ride his bike? No eyeballs. He had fake ones that he put in just not to scare people, but he could ride his bike and he could play basketball. No ability to see. Do you know what his mom decided when he was born and she found out her son was going to have this eye degenerative disorder? She decided, I'm not going to tell my son he can't see. Now, obviously, he figured out he couldn't see. But what does that mean? She never compensated for his lack. She let him figure things out. And a lot of us are actually handicapping people beyond their handicaps. Because we constantly jump in to rescue people. A lot of parents, dare I say, are rescuing perfectly capable kids because they want to jump in and do it for them so that they don't have to suffer at all. I'm not saying we should find ways to make our kids suffer, but don't rescue them from all of their suffering. What happens if you never lift something heavy, or if you put a cast on your arms? What happens when you take that cast off 6 weeks later? What happens to the muscle? It doesn't look the same as the arm that didn't have the cast on it. Why? Because you never had the opportunity to use the muscle and grow the muscle. A lot of us are taking the muscles away from our kids. We're teaching them to be helpless. And one of the worst things that you can do with somebody is teach them to be helpless. One of the best things that you can do, though, is remind the person that you have the utmost faith that they'll figure it out. I hated my dad for how many times he told me this. I love him for how many times he told me this. I wanted to be rescued so many times, and my dad would say, I know you'll figure this out. I used to think he was lazy, and that's why he wanted me to figure it out. But I'm eternally grateful that he had me do it, because I feel quite capable and confident to be able to do things today. But you don't want to take your child's independence away. You don't want to take your spouse's independence away. You don't want to take your siblings' independence away by doing everything for them. They'll never grow the mental, emotional, physical muscles that they need to be able to handle life. And here's the other thing. Remember, you're not going to be around forever. What happens when you're not around to do all those things for them? You have to have a boundary there. Number 6, Savior complex. This goes with that too. Sometimes we want to rescue everybody from the things that they're going through, not because of them, but because of us. I don't feel good unless I'm being a savior. These two kind of go hand in hand, but one is because the other person might be convincing us that they're helpless. This one is because I'm convinced that I am the rescuer, the knight in shining armor, the savior of everyone. And maybe I don't have a true identity if I'm not helping people. I tell my clients a lot, as much as I like helping them and I love the relationship that I establish with my clients, I want to have empty nest syndrome. I don't want them to rely on me because then I'm not doing my job. If they need me all the time, I'm not doing my job. If I don't have boundaries in my relationships with the people I'm working with, then they'll think that they can only do it because of me. But here's the other thing. If you tend to be a savior, you know who suffers the most? Your family. Because say you have a job and you don't allow anybody else to do the thing that you do. You want to be the person at your job that does it. What happens when you go on holiday with your family? Now your company is calling you, they're asking you all kinds of questions, and your family's going, are you here or are you not? If you're going to be on holiday with us. Don't keep going back to work as though you're there, you're on holiday. I know this because I worked for somebody once who was never on holiday, even when he was on holiday. And his family never had him there because he was always at the hotel making phone calls and doing his work. And I don't know if it was for this reason, but a lot of times we do it because we don't know what to do if we're not needed. Do you know the best thing for this? What's better than being a rescuer is being the person who empowers others to come back later and thank me for allowing them to see what they can do. If you want to be a savior, like teach people how to be independent. Give them the reins. I love when I leave, I tell whoever's taking over for me at work in my group, I say, thank you for letting me truly take a vacation. Thank you for taking over. I trust you to do the job. And it's always fine when I come back. And what's even better is people will need you at your job, not for what you do, but who you are. The kind of person that empowers people, disciples people, teaches people. That's what's important. Number 7, patience isn't a virtue. Have you heard this phrase, time will make it better? When do we usually hear this? A relationship breakup? Oftentimes it's when we're grieving a loss, a death. And we hear people say, time will make it better. Do you know there's nothing magical about time? Does time always make it better? Have you ever met somebody who's grieving and they're still grieving and their grieving gets worse and worse and worse even? It could be a relationship breakup. So time doesn't always make it better, but sometimes we use this phrase, time will make it better, because we don't want to face something we need to face. We don't want to confront a relationship issue. We don't want to talk about something that needs to be fixed. We want to ignore it, and it's much easier. It's kind of a lazy response. It's an excuse not to have to face the thing. So we go, oh, time will make it better. By the way, if you had an issue with or if somebody had an issue with you, and you found out about it like 6 months later, a year later, but they never told you, you just found out about it, wouldn't you be upset that they didn't just come to you and tell you, hey, I have a problem, can we work on this? Would you want them to be saying, well, time will make it better, meanwhile they're frustrated with you, upset with you? I wouldn't want that. I'd want them to come to me and say, hey, Amanda, can we work on this? By the way, sometimes the reason we don't want to do this, though, we don't want to confront the issue, because we know the relationship's not going to make it through that. And we're walking on eggshells to try to make sure that we don't have to lose the relationship. But if a relationship can be lost just because you confront something nicely, then what does it say about the relationship? It probably wasn't healthy to begin with. But if you let go of the relationship or let that person go because they don't want to get better, sometimes they'll come back to you later because they realize, oh, I do value this and I do want to do the work to make the relationship better. So that's really important. So if you're putting off doing the hard work that will ultimately lead to knowing who you are with in the relationship, that's important. Number 8, being a supplier. Sometimes we think they're always right and I'm always wrong. Have you ever played a game with a 4-year-old? A board game with a 4-year-old? What always happens? The rules always change. But who do they change to favor? The 4-year-old. Do you know sometimes 4-year-olds grow up to be adults that do the same thing? If you think you're always the wrong one, you may want to stay away from this person. Sometimes we call them narcissists. Now, I don't believe in using that word generously. There are a few people in the world that they only care about themselves. And it's important to set boundaries with those people. So I'm going to go to the next one because I'm running out of time. Number 9 is the enabler. And the enabler believes, I can't let go or something bad will happen. I work with a lot of people. Usually this happens more often with teenagers and young adults. And what I'm talking about is I'll see young people who are in relationships. It could be a friendship or a romantic relationship. And the other person in the relationship will say, if you leave me, I will hurt myself. If you don't stay with me, I'll hurt myself. Or if you don't talk to me all night, I'll hurt myself. And so what is the other person left to do? Well, what if I leave this person? I don't want to be around them. They're constantly sapping all of my energy. It's not a healthy relationship. And so what do? They stay in the relationship because they don't want that person to hurt themselves. Sometimes those people will even be emotional manipulators and threaten suicide. Because if you don't stay with me, I'm going to do this. Now, if you stay with that person, what are you actually telling that person? Some people say, well, you're telling them it's okay to do that. That's just the very surface of it. Do you know what you're actually telling them? That they don't deserve a healthy relationship. You're reinforcing their belief that they have to manipulate people in order to have healthy relationships. What's better is to say, you know what, you deserve to have a healthy relationship, and forcing me to stay in this relationship is not going to help you believe that. And if it gets worse than that, if the person says they're still going to hurt themselves, then what you can tell them is, I'm going to have the police do a welfare check. What does that do? It pulls you out of the emotional manipulation and allows somebody else to get involved instead. Somebody who's a professional at this too. You don't want to make the relationship worse. You don't want to make the person worse. If they're going to hurt themselves, you want to get them care right away. And so it's important to say this, but some people manipulate, oh, I'm not going to have a job if you don't do this, or I'm not going to have enough money if you don't do this. It's never a good idea to reinforce that belief in people that that's the only way to get what they want out of life. And so it is important to have a boundary. I'm going to skip this next slide. And the last one is a dreamer. Sometimes we believe we have to pretend it's something else. Sometimes we don't want to face the things that are right in front of us, and we want to believe, if you look at this, you can see a lot of people taking selfies. A lot of people taking pictures. I think everybody in here knows not to believe everything you see in a picture on social media, right? Everybody's life is not as great as some people portray it to be. But sometimes we actually put those pictures up because we don't want to face the reality and work on the things that need to be worked on. By the way, I think a lot of people know that I can say as a therapist, I've had clients who have been in counseling with me, and then I've seen their posts on social media, and it's nothing like what we're talking about in therapy. And I'm like, why did they do that? That's not even true. I can't say anything, though, because it's confidential. But sometimes the more you put out there, it's seen as an overcompensation for the issues that are lying in the family. But we do need to make a boundary with that. And I know we're running out of time. So I want to end with this slide. These are some important things to remember when you're looking at boundaries in your life. There's 3 steps to boundaries. One is recognize what your values are. If you know what you value, you'll be better at having boundaries. The second thing is actually implement the boundary. Sometimes that's implicitly stated, sometimes it's explicitly stated, meaning I don't have to tell everybody what my boundaries are to know what my boundaries are. If you kick me in the shin, I didn't need to tell you beforehand, don't kick me in the shin, to keep that as a boundary. Can you imagine how many boundaries I'd have to tell you about if that were the case? But the last thing, and this is very important, have consequences for the boundaries. I have mothers tell me all the time, I'm yelling at my kids all the time and they don't listen and I don't know why they're not listening. And I say, well, do you have any consequences? By the way, I am not a narcissist, but I'm an opportunist. If you have a boundary and you don't believe in your boundary, and I have an opportunity to bypass the boundary because it makes more sense to get where I want to go in life, do you think I'm not going to take that opportunity? So if you want something to stop, or if you need something to be a certain way, if there's no consequences, the person going to believe that that boundary is even important to you. Have you ever walked across grass where you're not supposed to get somewhere faster? Why do you do that? Why do you speed sometimes? Because you don't have a police officer on your tail giving you a ticket as soon as you do that. You're an opportunist too. We all operate based on consequences. So it's important to have consequences. 2, practice. Start practice saying things like, let me think about that. Don't just give an answer, a yes or no. Think about it first. Or I don't feel comfortable doing that. Number 3, recognize that boundaries are necessary. Our world does not work without boundaries. You have to have boundaries. They're necessary to our mental health too. And good boundaries represent truth and real kindness. You are not a nice person because you let everybody do whatever they want or get away with everything they want. You're actually being kind when you let people know what your expectations are. And you put those things up front or let them know as they need. Boundaries don't require the other person to understand them. How long would you have to wait to implement a boundary if it meant you had to make sure the other person understood it first? You don't wait for your kids to understand all your boundaries. I hope you don't. Can you imagine? Oh, I can't make them follow this boundary because they don't understand. You'd have to keep explaining. Sometimes you just do it anyway, and then they grow to understand the boundary. And then the last, God has boundaries, and Jesus practiced boundaries. A lot of people don't consider that. Thank you for listening. I know we went a little bit over our time, but we started a little bit late too, and hopefully you have food in your belly and you're not comatose. Thank you for listening.